Professor Hanson, I'd like to just quickly bring you in on one other aspect. Is the Canadian election another sort of example for how leaders from across the West should actually stand up to Donald Trump and his protectionist policies and transactional nature?
Well, it's a fascinating question because there's really two models out there, and you can cite some evidence in favor of both of them. Carney and Canada generally has stood up to Trump. China has done so to a superlative degree, and the British are pursuing a strategy of accommodation, if not appeasement. There are different views on this, but as far as I can judge Donald Trump, when he smells weakness, he smells blood. And what we've seen in response, above all, to China, but to a degree to Canada, when he exempted from some of the tariffs those goods that were covered by free trade acts, is that he will respond to strength. So that's a long and rather academic way of saying, yes, I think there's something to what you're suggesting.
Well, in what ways then might this outcome of this election actually redefine Canadian federalism, especially in multicultural provinces like Quebec?
Well, what I hope it will do in terms of redefining Canadian federalism is finally force us to get rid of these absurd and ludicrous provincial barriers between the country.
Right.
We have suffered for decades from a low productivity problem, which frankly the Justin Trudeau Liberals completely ignored. It's why our GDP per capita is declining. One of the easiest ways and cheaper than building infrastructure is to remove those barriers. So point one, I hope that's how federalism will change. But I think some of our biggest changes will be in foreign policy, and I could say something about those. Perhaps you want to stick with federalism for the moment.
Right. Ray, meanwhile, if Pierre Poilievre wins, do you foresee a serious disruption in the Canadian-US relationship on aspects of trade, climate, or defense?
If he wins?
Yes.
Is that your question? You know, I think there'll be some kind of adjustment. Things will be somewhat different, but I don't think he's going to roll over and do what Trump wants either. I mean, I think that would be political suicide for any Canadian politician. He might be a little more accommodationist. I think, you know, before Trump started with all the tariffs, he was seen as kind of a Canadian Trumpy figure, if not quite as extreme or mercurial. So I think it would be somewhat of a change, but I don't think he would be like, oh, I think these tariffs are great, let's keep doing it.
Right. Michael, meanwhile, given Donald Trump's tariffs and annexation threats, do you believe that Washington is quietly rooting for stability over ideological kinship?
With all due respect to the President of the United States, Donald Trump is a bully. You talk about annexing Canada, you talk about Canada being the 51st state, you talk about Governor Trudeau. All those are little jabs to see how far you can go. I think Canada respected Mark Carney standing up and saying we will not address that. I was in Charlevoix, Quebec for the G7 ministers meeting there, where their finance ministers were there. And the thing that came across when I was speaking to many international global representatives was the shock of Donald Trump even saying the fact that he was going to annex Canada. I think once Canada finds a prime minister that will be elected at the end of this evening, that person should go down to Mar-a-Lago and have a tete-a-tete and work this out immediately, because it's harming people on both sides of the border. And I think Donald Trump respects someone who stands up to him. And I think he did respect Mark Carney. I was disappointed that Pierre Poilievre did not take an airplane flight down to Mar-a-Lago on his own initiative, and at least have a chat. But I think Donald Trump respects strength, and he knows very well that Canada has some strings that they could pull to make life in America a little more difficult than it already is. I agree with my colleague on the panel. I mean, currently he's underwater in popularity, but like every politician, you do all the cutting and the hurting and the inoculation of the patient at the very beginning. So as your term goes on, things get better. So I think things will get better, and I think once we resolve who's going to lead this country, it's also going to put us in a better negotiating state.
Right. Professor Hanson, meanwhile, I want to touch upon a separate aspect we haven't spoken about yet. How much does Canada's parliamentary system insulate it or expose it to the global wave of strongman politics?
The global wave of?
A global wave of strongman politics.
Oh, right. Well, yes, I mean, I'm slightly more optimistic on this point than my colleagues. The country is more divided than it should be. There is bitterness in Western Canada, where I come from, although that's nothing new. It was far worse during the years of the National Energy Program. But we are not in a situation that France is in, where election after election after election, the neo-fascists are coming close to the presidency. And we're not in the situation of Germany, where 24% want to vote for a country that will take Germany out of the European Union. And we're not in a situation in which the leader of this country is hell-bent on dismantling democracy and starting conflicts with all its allies. Neither candidate is actually a strong man, frankly. And so I don't think we are in that space. And to some degree, the disaster that is the Trump presidency will inoculate us against that. But I think there are cultural breaks on that in this country anyway.
Right. Michael, meanwhile, I know that the Conservatives have rallied against the cost of living crisis. Justin Trudeau's name has been propped up as far as how Canada has been shambles, has been related to his reign. But do the Conservatives have specific policies to solve the cost of living crisis in Canada? Or is their solution more, we're not the Liberals?
Well, I think Mark Carney was late in publishing his platform. I think when the housing topic came up, the Liberals started talking about cutting taxes and federal taxes, and Poilievre came up and said that he wanted to get rid of, I believe it was the HST. So they're all moving and trying to reduce taxes. Also, I would note that Carney axed the inheritance tax because he saw that as being a detrimental thing to his party. So between the Trudeau's carbon tax and the inheritance tax, those were two things that were very distasteful. Those were things that Poilievre and the Conservatives would never have instituted. I think one of the other points, too, is Poilievre's campaign has talked about cutting the cost of government, making things smarter and more efficient, whereas I think some of the initiatives that Mark Carney was presenting was increasing the deficit and thinking, we come back to that kitchen table aspect, when at the end of the month you're short $1,000, you don't go another $1,000 in debt to be $2,000 in debt and think that it's going to solve your problem. So I think this is kind of like the inoculation syndrome that's happening, which is what America is going through now.